Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Dawn Dev Podcast. In this episode, we will be discussing today's very interesting development with Electronic Arts and Reddit. Very short version is that Electronic Arts now has the most downvoted Reddit comment of all time by about a factor of 20. It's pretty bad. There's, let's see, as of right now, let me refresh the page. It has negative 562,000 points, which is just insane. So, I'm your host, Chad Spangler. We are here with our head developer, John Grady, and we're going to take this podcast kind of one step at a time. We're going to discuss what the initial problem was, why their reaction, or why their comment got the reaction it did, and then their response after that. So, what initially happened is somebody complained on the Star Wars Battlefront subreddit, and they said they paid $80 to have Darth Vader unlocked or locked at the beginning of the game. In the previous Battlefront, he was available from the get-go. You didn't have to do anything for him. But in Battlefront 2, you either have to pay for him or grind quite a bit. It seems I saw anywhere from like 10 to 40 hours. I'm not exactly sure, but either a grind or paying. And someone was pretty mad about that. So just about that, like, Grady, what do you think about that monetization strategy?
I mean, the strategy as a whole, like I said, I've not been following it super well. I know it's been through a few changes with early previews and betas and things, because there has been a lot of blowback. So I can't specify specifically on if Battlefront is like the worst offender yet to do this or not, or if it's just the fact that people are fed up. I'm seeing more and more articles by the day about how bad this problem's getting. I've seen several calls for Congress to get involved and start legislating these loot boxes, like their slot machines.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's to the point where Jim Sterling has started complaining on his YouTube channel that, like, I'm not intending to do a anti-loot crate episode every time there's an episode, but every time I think I'm about to release something different, someone else ups the ante with their level of just terrible stuff they can do with loot crates.
Right, and I've seen a lot of that. I've watched a lot of his videos on it, and he's, sometimes I think he goes a little too far in criticizing the overall, monetization strategy, but he's pretty right on the button when it comes to AAA titles about how they use these not in a way to enhance the player's experience, but just to get more money after they've already taken a full $60.
Yeah, I really appreciate the service that people like Jim Sterling and Sid Alpha do for, as not just a developer, but as someone who actually plays games. But I do at times wonder and hope they're cognizant of the fact that, if they're going to act as kind of the gaming community's immune system, I do hope they're careful and cognizant not to become an autoimmune disorder, as it were.
Right.
And not, to be very, very careful in when they look at things. I've noticed personally in the last 6 months that the internet in general seems to be getting more and more mobby and lynchy. Not
you don't say,
but in general on topics, commercial, political, entertainment, you name it. The internet seems to be getting a lot more vicious.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the second part of this equation. So basically, somebody's very mad that they paid $80 for this game, and a character that was available on the previous game is locked. So that's the initial post. The response from EA's community team, that's the name of the user that got all of this hate. I'll read it in its entirety because it's not super long. The intent is to provide players with a sense of pride and accomplishment for unlocking different heroes. As for cost, we selected initial values based upon data from the open beta and other adjustments made to milestone rewards before launch. Among other things, we're looking at average player credit earn rates on a daily basis and we'll be making constant adjustments to ensure that players have challenges that are compelling, rewarding, and of course attainable via gameplay. We appreciate the candid feedback and the passion the community has put forth around the current topics here on Reddit, our forums, and across numerous social media outlets. Our team will continue to make changes and monitor community feedback and update everyone as soon and as often as we can. That is the whole comment, and that comment is the one that has almost 600,000 downvotes as of right now. So, why this level of backlash, do you think?
I think it has nothing at all to do with the comment. The comment itself is the most vanilla, bland, standard customer service. I mean, it's a little tone deaf.
Yeah, but maybe that is the problem though. Is like it's so vanilla that people are like, not like, this
I think
really.
That's the thing though. I think the downvotes are not about the specific comment.
Mm-hmm.
They are a statement on this is not okay. This cannot continue. We gave you guys an inch with loot boxes, when the first few games started doing this. And EA and Ubisoft and y'all are taking every mile you can, pushing it to the point where you got, the internet equivalent of riots going on over the egregiousness of what you're doing. And we're not going to take it. We're going to make our displeasure known that we're paying full price for your game. Often we're paying more than full price for your game because, you've got so many different collector's editions and we're buying one of those. And we know there's going to be season pass and we've probably bought that. And now you want to tack microtransactions on top of that. And it's Jim Sterling makes this point, and I agree with him, that the idea that, well, you can't make the money because games haven't gone up in price over the last 10 years. They're still $60. They're not. $60 buys you something, but it does not buy you the same breadth of content it did 10 years ago. For that, you need to pay for the $100 edition that comes with the season pass. And then maybe you're getting the same amount of content.
Right. And
people are just fed up with that.
Yeah, you're right. It's not just this isolated incident. It's the fact that it keeps happening over and over and over. And, at some point, that bubble has to burst. Like the outrage has to get to a point where people actually notice because, and this is another thing that Jim Sterling says quite a bit, is, they, up until this point, haven't really had to care about the backlash because they've been making so much money from these tactics that it just doesn't matter. It offsets all of the, lost sales from outrage by a factor of like 1 million. So, but, now.
I don't think it's going to get any better until we reach a point with loot boxes that we reached with the brown and gray Middle Eastern first-person shooter when we were shortly out of high school, where it reaches to the point that people just stop buying them. And then, look, all of a sudden, then you had this burst of indie games and, AAA developers all of a sudden discovered that, there are settings other than, 21st century battlefields. And there are, in fact, colors beyond brown and gray. And, now you get things like Overwatch that is, beautiful and colorful and, has all these things that back 10 years ago, a publisher would not have let happen because it was too cartoony and it wasn't mature and adult and like bad enough and whatever their and I think I want to stress this point real quick is I do think a lot of this is the publishers versus the developers. I can't imagine a developer who goes in and develops a loot box system like the one that's in Battlefront or like the one that's in Destiny or like the one that's in Assassin's Creed as a gameplay feature. That is something that somebody at publishing and marketing said, you need to put a system like this in there for the money it's going to generate. You need to find a way to get this system in here to generate coin.
Mhm.
Whereas I can absolutely see, there are instances where a system like that is a natural gameplay choice. Something like the collectible card games, like Hearthstone or the Elder Scrolls one, or there's a couple other ones.
Shadowverse.
I've played that are these where it makes a little more sense as something you might do as a developer, opposed to like, why is this here?
Right. So yeah, and that is another, like, I've been watching videos because, like I said, we're an indie studio. Like, at some point we're gonna have to use some kind of alternate monetization besides pricing our game at $60, because we're not gonna do that at least for a long, long time. And I've been watching videos like, what are good ways to do this that make sense in a game? And I feel like nobody at these big AAA companies watched any of those videos, because they're doing the exact opposite, and it's mind-boggling, like, because it's and I feel like a little bit of it's going to hurt us too, because it's those things are going to become so, so hated that, if we put something in any game like, oh, here we go again, this is just more EA bull, and be like, but it's not, like. So I'm a little concerned about that. Like, I guess I'm not too concerned, because even Jim Sterling, he keeps his commentary pretty much focused on AAA titles. He's aware, and I've heard him mention that indie games that actually don't have millions of dollars do need, various, revenue flows and stuff like that. So maybe it's not going to be such a big deal, you think?
No, I think players can see intent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've talked about perception things in the past. Part of the reason why I didn't want us to go with Unity, for example, as an engine, was that we couldn't afford to get the Made with Unity stamp taken off of it. Mm-hmm. And, that kind of has that asset flip stink to it. Yeah, there are great games made with Unity, like Hearthstone, but nobody knows it's made with Unity because they paid the money and got the stamp taken off of it.
Right.
And so there's this kind of, while a lot of developers love Unity, a lot of like people who buy games see that made with Unity stamp and it stinks, and it's a reason not to buy the game. And so it definitely, I think, a similar thought process has to go through with any kind of monetization strategy an indie is making. Is like, is this even a benign, even a well-intentioned way of doing this that makes sense with the game, whatever it be, all that? Is it inherently too toxic because of bad actors who have misused it, who have pushed it to the absolute most insane limits, where people see it and it is, this monetization strategy is exploitative, is what people have in their mind.
Right.
And in many, many, many cases, they are absolutely right. And I do think that's a case where the AAA industry has a real bad habit of grabbing into something, sinking their teeth in it, and taking it to the extreme. They did the same thing with multiplayer back when we were in high school, where if your game wasn't multiplayer, they weren't going to publish it. And by God, you were going to shoehorn multiplayer in some way. And the number of games we got that were worse than they would have been because that multiplayer got shooed in. Right. I remember Mass Effect 3 coming out and this terrible, hacked on, barely functional multiplayer. And I'm just like, why? Why is this here? I'm sure it took away from the development of the main game when it came out. I'm sure, it maybe had something to do with why they didn't have time, apparently, to, clean the ending up and everything before they did release. Well, why is because a publisher, in this case EA, I'm sure went and said, we're not going to publish Mass Effect 3 unless there's multiplayer. Find a way to get it in there.
Right.
And I will point out, this was a while ago Mass Effect 3 came out. It may have been one of the first games to do this. It had crates. Mm-hmm. It did have crates. I distinctly remember that.
Okay. So the third part of this equation. is EA's response to the backlash, which I thought was the most interesting part. I thought it was way more interesting than the actual comment. So I'm just going to read a little snippet because it's a bit long. But here's the sample from it. Making games great comes from regular tuning. As one example, today we're making a substantial change based on what we've seen during Play First trial. There's been a lot of discussion around the amount of in-game credits and time it takes to unlock some of our heroes, especially Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. Unlocking a hero is a great accomplishment in the game, something we want players to have fun earning. We use data from the beta to help set these levels, but it's clear that more changes were needed. So, we're reducing the amount of credits needed to unlock the top heroes by 75%. Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader will now be available for however many credits, and then it goes on to, say the new pricing. It's coming out today, and then they say that they're going to do a Reddit AMA soon, which I think is an awful idea from them. But then again, I don't know. It sounds like an awful idea, but if they can actually pull it off, maybe they could repair some damage. But
it depends. From a marketing PR standpoint, they're going to go and they're going to get crucified.
Oh yeah,
but they probably need to go and get crucified, or at least it shows they're willing to get egged. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with testing or fine tuning or.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
There was a riot on Reddit, and they made a reactionary response to it. The idea that they have to fine tune these currency rates and things. I'm sure somebody from EA came in. What's the studio? Is it DICE?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sure somebody from EA came into DICE with a bunch of spreadsheets and a bunch of progression curves and time to currency curves and said, this is what we want it to look like to get this much monetary value out of gameplay time and stuff. I'm 98% certain that there was more thought put into how long that system takes to accrue things than many other parts of the game. Yeah. Because I'm sure that somebody from EA was doing that thought and not somebody actually making the game.
Right.
Which is why I think you've seen them tone it back several times, is they knew what they wanted from a monetary standpoint. And a couple times now the community has said that is unacceptable. That is insane.
Yeah. And two things. First of all, going along what you were saying, kind of along the same line, these are just lies, right? We're making a substantial change based on what we've seen from the first play first trial, their official trial. No, you're not. This had nothing to do with your first play first trial. It just didn't. And then the fine tuning, the fine tuning thing is hilarious because when you fine tune values, you don't drop them by 75%. That's not fine tuning at all. Are you kidding me? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's the kind of math error we would have caught at First Friday. That's not a wee little bit.
Yeah. Oh, we decided to fine tune intrusion protocol, so we cut it down from 10 levels to 2. So, but and then the second thing is that I was thinking about is this just if the initial response was tone deaf, then this is completely deaf. Just nobody. It took me I didn't know. Nobody was talking about the actual price tag of Darth Vader in that thread. I read a lot of those comments today. Nobody was talking about the actual price of Darth Vader. They were talking about the system that's in place, Well, but it took me. I didn't even know even a ballpark until I talked to you right before the podcast, and I read those comments a lot. So nobody was complaining about the price tag, but EA's oh, we heard you loud and clear. We're reducing the price, a thing that nobody was really complaining about that much. Clearly you didn't listen.
Not to defend the slimiest, stinkiest operator in the industry. But what are they to do? I imagine that the system which unlocks all this stuff, and this progression system is pretty deeply rooted in the game's code base at this point. I'm pretty sure it's got its tentacles wrapped around everything, I would imagine. And so it's not like they can just be like, oh, well, oops, that progression system's gone. Like, they've got to do something, and maybe reducing the price is the best they can manage on short notice because of how complicated it would be to rip that system out.
Right.
And, I think the bigger problem is they need to address that. The problem is the system was there in the first place.
Right.
They're not Team Fortress. They're not Overwatch. Like, this is their second game in this series in 2.5 years, something like that. Like, it feels like the first one just came out.
Right.
Like, I actually feel like I'm moderately more upset that they released a half-finished first Battlefront and then released another one almost immediately. But Maple, I would agree that probably wouldn't be too difficult, but I seriously doubt the overlords at EA would even consider that.
Right. And I can understand not wanting to rip out a system, like you said, that they, designed a lot of the stuff around, but at the same time, your response could be more honest than that, somewhat more honest, But
back to the point I was trying to make before
I
responded to the comment there. I imagine they're going to try and run Battlefront the same way these AAA publishers run all their other franchises, as a annual or biannual thing, and putting this kind of monetization sync and stuff. Firstly, I'll say that I think Heroes of the Storm and League of Legends and stuff, they do their monetization much more responsibly than this.
Mm-hmm. But
also a key point about their monetization is they're a game that they expect you to play for years. EA doesn't expect you to play Battlefront 2 for years. They expect you to play Battlefront 2 until they release Battlefront 3, probably a year and a half, 2 years from now.
Right.
And so expecting this kind of monetary sink into an annual or biannual franchise like that is just repugnant. I mean, I don't know how to justify it, because it's to get all the stuff you want monetarily is bonkers. And if they're setting the times for unlock through gameplay so high, I don't mind having to grind out a hero or something on a game I'm going to play for years on a long chain. But if I know that's going to be replaced in a year, well, then at minimum, my unlocks better carry over from title to title,
Right. And to point to a company that I think has made their monetization and DLC and stuff like that pretty good system, Rock Band. I know the fads, kind of passed and not a lot of people play it anymore, but surprise, surprise, I do. But I'm not sure what years they came out, but in the entirety of Rock Band's, it's been over 10 years, I think it's been over 10 years. There have been 4 Rock Bands, and every Rock Band that comes out, there's a pretty justifiable reason for needing another disc, and or at least a good amount of content to justify that, and they come out with DLC literally every week. Sometimes they skip for, occasions, or if they, there's no DLC this week, don't worry, the rest of the month will be really good. But on a pretty consistent basis, every Tuesday, I go to Reddit and I see what's coming out on Rock Band this week. And I can buy what I want. I don't have to buy what I don't want for any sort of in-game progression. And the last, they came out with some expansion stuff in Rock Band Rivals. It was a $30 expansion pack, basically. But it didn't just give you songs, it gave you new features. It gave you access to the new ranking system that they have. It gave you access to online multiplayer, to Cruise that they introduced, to the Rock You drama, which is a new single player experience. There was a wealth of content that went along with that not full, $60 price tag, because it wasn't a full new game. Rock Band Rivals was a very is a very, expansive, addition, but they knew that it wasn't, it didn't justify a whole new game,
Well, and I think what we keep coming back to here is intent. Is the intent, and I don't want to cast too much aspersion on DICE or the developers there.
Right.
I don't work there. I don't know what it's like in those offices. But at the end of the day, EA is the overlord who can probably make DICE do whatever they want. So I really do want to focus most of my statements on EA, especially because, well, they are in charge of lots of game studios, and they seem to behave consistently across all of them. But, like, there's an intent, and is the intent to make a good game and to take care of your customers and to release content that they'll want and care about? Or is the intent to extract dollar bills at any cost?
Yeah. And from a business standpoint, I get businesses exist to do just that, right? But it's that's not literally the only reason they exist. They exist to, have customers that, care about them, that don't hate them, I want to say that in the long run, all this bad PR, all these, terrible, monetization schemes that they're just shoehorning into everything will come back to bite them and ultimately not be good monetarily, but
there is some monetary cost. I love Star Wars.
Right.
I love cool spaceships and stuff. If you told me Battlefront 2 didn't have all this garbage monetization in it, and you told me there was a $100 collector's edition, and that collector's edition came with a unique, only available in the collector's edition, Inferno Squad TIE Fighter for Star Wars X-Wing, the tabletop game, I would go buy that. I would love it. I'd get a cool TIE Fighter for my tabletop game, and, I would get, obviously, that would be very difficult because they would be, they'd have to work with Fantasy Flight Games and all this back and forth. I'm sure there'd be rev shares on that and nonsense. But they could do things along those lines where, a cool statue or something, I would probably get built for a cool Star Wars statue. But I'm not even going to pay $60 on a game that sounds like it's a second job just to unlock the game there. Just
in
to
both
unlock
in both content. Time and money.
Yes,
and it's they've taken, and you mentioned collector's editions, and I feel like EA, even with Star Wars Battlefront, but also several other titles, have taken and they've just turned collector's editions, which I think used to be completely, an acceptable business model, and they have just gone insane with it. There's 5 different versions of every game you can buy. The normal game that's $60, the silver edition that's $80, the gold that's $100, the platinum that's $1 million. It's
the more egregious thing that relies on customer ignorance in most cases is often the statue editions now do not include the game.
Really?
Yes.
I wasn't even aware of that.
I believe Ubisoft in particular is bad about that.
Yeah. And Maple Tuna in the chat, he says the problem with the problem with doing something like that for them is it costs a lot more than just putting things behind paywalls and time sinks.
Well, I would agree, except they're already doing it. I mean, they do release all these different collector's editions in addition to these paywall monetizations. And I think that's part of the problem too. I think that's why people are so upset is if you love a game series, let's pretend we're Call of Duty guy for a second, and you love Call of Duty and you buy Call of Duty every year, and that's your game. That's, you play Heroes. You play Hearthstone, chat. I play Heroes. Let's pretend for a second we're the guy who Call of Duty is our game. And then every year, okay, well, I need to buy the $150 collector's edition because this is my game and I love it and I want the big one. And then I've got to buy the season pass if that doesn't come in that, which it doesn't always. And then you start adding loot crates to that. At some point you start being like, like your game's not worth $300-$400.
Right.
And it starts adding up to that. And I think that's the big problem.
Right.
And once again, I think it goes back to intent and stuff. Like I said, I'm much more willing to put that kind of money into something that exists over a long period of time and gets long-term support.
Mm-hmm.
There is an argument to be made that, like MOBAs, for example, like League of Legends and stuff, they need to sell skins to pay for their game's development because their game doesn't stop when it goes gold, and it doesn't stop just because it's released all its DLC.
Mm-hmm.
They're popping out a new hero at X time interval, conceivably until, obviously not literally, but conceivably till the end of time.
Right.
They're releasing content patches, conceivably till the end of the time. So it's like games as a service almost, opposed to here's our $60 game. We're going to be done with it onto the next one in a year. And the $60 is a nibble. We are nearing the point where the $60 version of a game with no extra fees and stuff is like a demo plus.
Yeah.
It's like the free version of WoW you can get now where you can play to level 20 and spend no money.
God, that hurts to hear because I remember man, when I was, when we were a lot younger, you got a $60 title, that was a big thing, and you could play it forever, and you didn't have to pay, unless you wanted the super cool attachment for your console, the physical object for your console, you didn't have to pay in it. And I agree with what you said earlier that the $60 price point, it hasn't changed in that long, so that's why we can justify it. It hasn't. And the problem isn't, in my opinion, when this kind of goes along with what you were saying, the problem isn't each individual monetization strategy. It's all of them all at once. You're paying $120 up front. You're paying microtransactions, for, these skins or whatever. You're paying for loot boxes. Sometimes you're literally just paying for content that is clearly in the game, but just behind a paywall. You're paying for all these things all at once. And it's not each individual thing that, drains you. It's just, and that's Hearthstone. A lot of people complain about Hearthstone in that, I buy these packs and I don't get anything and they just kind of farm money off of me. It's not really a free to play game. I disagree. I think you can play it free to play feasibly. It's a weird balance because when I play, the lowest rank is 25. Once you're rank 20, everybody has the, net deck top tier decks. And you can't maybe is that really just all those people from rank 20 up? Are they really all pouring money into this game? I guarantee so many of those are free to play players. And people really like to complain about Hearthstone. But Hearthstone, you at least, even if you, don't think you're getting the value, even if you think you're being drained of your money, I feel like you have to admit that it's far better than, Hearthstone's free to play. It's far better than, upfront, but it's far better than, paying $30 or even $60, and then the microtransactions with the packs. And then, and there are very few other microtransactions where you can buy heroes and stuff, but it's not overboard. It's not constant. Well, there's one every once in a while.
I think that's what doesn't upset people as much because it isn't every monetization strategy at once. I remember there was a little bit of blowback when Overwatch came out because it was $60 and there were crates. And, we've got to the point now where being full price and having crates is that's not even egregious anymore. That's just standard.
Yeah.
And on Maple-Tuna's last point, I'll agree with you. I've seen some of the numbers on some industry reports and things, and it's a lot of money, but I don't think that money justifies being evil. We have a certain set of doctrines with this company and how we behave, and one of the things that I made an absolute stand on when we were setting it up is, if we have to do stuff that we're uncomfortable with because that's what it takes to make the company exist, well, then the company needs to not exist.
Right. And I feel like that's a good stance to take, but I also feel like it's a much easier stance for us to take because, we have existed for less than a year. We've released one game. We have made basically zero money.
But EA is not exactly hurting for money either.
Oh, yeah. I'm not trying to defend EA. I'm just saying, like, the same philosophy is harder to take with them, but I'm sure for them because, they are like, people might be more okay with making questionable decisions because it's I hate to use the phrase, but too big to fail. If
Well, like, I almost wonder if they're liberated by being so badly perceived in general. I do wonder if there's a tipping point where, like, if everybody thinks you're the devil, well, what's the harm in being the super devil?
Yeah, that's very true. And I agree with Maple Tuna in the chat said the issue between, or the difference between you and a public company is they have to answer to investors, which is true, but they're making so much money. Like it has to, at a certain point, investors have to consider PR, right? Like,
yeah, that would be the argument I would make is yes, short term, you can make a lot of gains. And I feel like this is the problem with American capitalism in general, is you have these companies that, conceivably live longer than people, conceivably live for, 100 or more years if they're well managed. But because a lot of the incentive structure is managed by, C-suite people who are concerned about the bonuses while they're there and what the investors think about while they're there, the focus is often on short-term growth and unsustainable practices so that whoever is in charge of the C-suite can get their bonuses while they're there. And if the company blows up 2 years after they leave because of something very unsustainable they were doing, well, that's not their problem because they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the thing is investors really need to, I think, hold people accountable and say, okay, this is fine for now. I'm making a lot of money right now, but when I go to retire, is my stock portfolio going to take a huge hit because your company just takes a huge hit because you were doing something stupid you shouldn't have been doing that looked good on paper. And I absolutely think this thing, as it seems to be now rising to crisis levels, is one of those things where I hope it'll get to a point where consumers will turn off and not buy games like Battlefront 2 that have this monetization strategy baked into it in such a slimy way. And the companies that don't realize, oh, it's not working anymore, I need to stop doing this, I need to stop doing it now. You're talking hundreds of millions of dollars on AAA titles that flopped, lost.
Right.
You can only take so many of those flops.
And I agree. And I think we've pretty well covered this topic. So I think we've had a good length in this podcast, so I think we should wrap it up. We talked about, EA's Reddit disaster, as the title is. What happened today? What got them the most downvoted and universally hated comment in Reddit's history? We talked about why that happened, every step of the way. We talked about, we did more of a little deeper dive into monetization strategies as a whole and, corporate responsibility and things like that. So this has been another episode of Down Dev Podcast, and we will see the public reaction. I haven't seen a lot of the reaction to their latest, we reduced the prices, but I'm sure it's not going to be good. And I am looking forward to that AMA.
Real quick, I want to add one thing.
Okay.
As an industry, we got real lucky in the early 90s that we said, hey, we'll police ourselves. Government doesn't need to get involved. We'll make the ESRB, all that. Increasingly, there are calls that the government needs to get involved on anti-gambling, anti-slot machine type stuff with these loot boxes.
Mm-hmm.
So, to every indie developer listening, I would just say, think about what you're doing and be careful and just think for a second. Do you want to have the government come in and tell you, you can't use this game mechanic, or you can't do this, or you can't do that? Because if we don't police ourselves and we don't behave ourselves, it will happen. American government's pretty dysfunctional. It might take a while, but you can only exploit people for so long before they will come and regulate us.
And then when they do regulate us, there's a good chance it'll be, horribly structured because it's written by people who have no idea what our industry, entails. So yeah, that's the end of the Don Dev podcast this time around. Follow us on all our socials. Check us out. Continue to follow us. We'll have some updates coming pretty soon. So until next time, this is Chad Spangler and John Grady, and we will see you next time. Bye.